the search feature, upper right hand corner, and you just do a natural search, just something, best practices, whatever. You will see in the search results. Unfortunately, they're not all put together, but you'll see a link there. Search the forums, which it's what it's giving the results for. But there's also one that says search blog. When you do that, that brings up a ton of the old blog articles.
Interesting. When you go,
So
especially you go to advanced search.
Yeah, you can do that as well, I believe.
Search, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you can go to just DealerRefresh.com without forum. And
yeah.
That was the interface or the front page for the blog. It might redirect you now, though.
It does.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, it's just masking the subdomain. Yeah, I mean, I went from the sitemap, and the sitemap also shows you the last activity. So it's technically not the last 5 years; it's the last 5 years of activity, which is better.
Yeah,
you know, because you could have a thread that's 8 years old, but still keeps popping
like QR
up.
codes.
Yeah, yeah. Uncle Joe, right? That one's probably ancient.
Uncle Joe loves to keep threads alive.
Oh, dude, that one's never dying. Yeah. Dude, that's the way to do it.
Do a category called Uncle Joe.
Yeah. Special search. Just a rant.
Joe search.
Or all the ideas that Joe had and posted.
Joe is actually the most in tune with what's going on in like generative AI and AI tech of anybody. Like that's all, he's in it deep.
Yeah, very true.
He's having fun.
Here's an old article from JD Rucker.
Oh, have you seen his he's now doing AI music?
Oh yeah, he's showed me. I get him on LinkedIn, and then I'll get a text and I'll get an email with different ones.
Yep.
So it'll be like,
the first one he sent me was so creepy.
Yeah, it'll be like a country western about collision repair for a Ford dealership.
Oh yeah, Jeff. Imagine, remember those old what was it, String or those videos where they stitched all the photos together and then did this robot voice just reading all the features? Well, imagine that as a song. Oh,
snuck up on me.
Got a little cut off there, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's better than that.
Yeah, it's better. Oh, for sure. But once, because it's AI, but if you didn't, like if you were a customer going there and seeing that for the first time, like, why is there a country song reading my sunroof and ABS?
Right. It's like, 24-point inspection. It's just like, why are we, yeah. Well, I think what he does is he generates the script, then he generates the music, then he generates the visuals and stitches it all together. And you get this like, really strange video that you definitely feel is synthetic. You know what I mean? But also it's like way better than most things,
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got to ask Bill Vaughn here to see, should we do more pre-show then? Less full show? He's saying
we talked about how
pre-show
I meant to call Sean Rains. I got to give him a real quick call. We talked about doing a show that was just us talking bullshit.
Yeah, he reached out to me as well. I forgot to get back to him too. Glad you said something.
You're welcome.
1 hour each. Is that even when we talk about booze on Fridays, Bill? That's usually what the pre-show is about. Well, anyway, John, welcome back. Been a while.
John, good seeing you.
It's been a minute.
Haven't aged a day.
I don't know. He might be a little grayer.
Yeah, there's a difference between here and here.
It's usually the other way around.
Got some of that going here since you realized.
Yeah.
I've got the inverse of you.
Exactly.
It's funny if you just stare at the two of you on the screen
I
for a
know.
really long
That's
time.
as soon as we got on camera, I'm like, man, we're looking similar.
John Singo's here having some deja vu.
Like if you get close here, do that and go to the
Yeah.
other
Oh no,
There you go.
I don't know about that.
Oh wow.
That was scary.
You guys are nerds.
No, has anyone ever done that?
Not on this show.
Innovating, bringing it back.
Completely.
2-year hiatus, starting off with the innovation right away. We're doing a face smash.
Yeah. So, and now, yeah, Christine's here. I haven't seen Christine in a while either.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, congrats on the new deal.
Mm-hmm.
Exciting.
Well, we want to talk about two things today. So, just to preface things for the audience a little further. So, you've got a new venture. We definitely want to dive into that. And then, two, the things you're doing in that new venture could be pretty cool for some things we could add into DealerRefresh and vice versa. So, you did some exploration of our content. It'll be fun to explore that with you because we don't know what happened. So be news.
Yeah, it's 20 years, right? Coming up on 20 years?
19.
Yeah.
19.
Yeah.
In less than 30 days.
Is it 19?
Cinco de Mayo, man. That's how
Yeah.
I remember. You have a margarita for Mexico and DealerRefresh.
That's why I never forget my wife's birthday. It's on tax day.
Oh, that's like almost as bad as having a like birthday and Christmas, right? That's worse.
Yeah, it's worse.
It's worse. Let's be
Share the day with Jesus. That's good.
But as a kid, you're just like,
Oh yeah.
No, yeah, yeah. You get gypped.
So, what you doing, man? What's the new gig?
So, LVL UP Auto. I wanted to, really after the sale of Driven Data, took some time off, thought about what was next, and ultimately, I started looking at what all of the software companies in auto were doing, and I was just kind of curious because I had gone away from it for a little bit. I took, completely cut off from it for, 6-7 months. So I started thinking about like, okay, I wonder what everybody's up to. What are the products were, just generally what's up. So that naturally led to me like building a list of companies. And I was just kind of keeping track of these companies. Then the list got fancier, as I kind of often do. And I'm like, all of a sudden, I had like 900 companies in this list. And it started getting wider and more, intense. And I stopped and I realized like no one has this list. This list doesn't live anywhere. And it's kind of cool because I could see, the investment history of the companies, who those investors are, who the leadership of the companies are, a summary of what the company does, and the categories that those companies have products in, and just some of the general information about each company. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if dealerships had access to this list and that was turned into a service? And then I kind of sat on it and didn't do anything. And a while later, I created, I had the idea of doing like an online brokerage where I was going to help people buy cars using some of the techniques that I had learned at Driven Data, using audiences and using CRM data. And so I get everything working. And then like I start reading about like all these new rules for PII. And I'm like,
Little Grand Leach Bliley.
yeah. And so I reach out to a few people, had a couple meetings, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this at all. Like I don't want to. I don't want to, go through all the liability of the first party data and deal with the, insurance. And that's kind of what Driven Data was. It just felt like the same company after 10 years. So I was like, okay. And I kind of was just depressed because, like, man, I had this cool idea and now I'm not going to do it. But I branded it and the name of it was Level Up. And I was like, man, it'll be kind of this fresh thing and level up like a car buying experience. And so then I was like, well, I don't want to do that because that idea totally sucks now. And so then I was like, well, I got this other idea. Let me pull that list back. So I kind of cracked open this list and I'm like, well, Level Up kind of works for that too. And then I thought more about it. And when originally I was like, well, this could be like a marketplace where you could find a vendor. And anytime you hear about like the story of a marketplace and how they get built, there's the chicken and egg problem, right? You have to have supply and demand. So how do you build supply if you don't have demand? How do you build demand if you don't have supply? And that's just why most marketplaces fail. So instead of focusing on a marketplace, I decided to build a vendor management platform. And I noticed that the cost for vendors were going up. That was a big concern. As margins were being compressed, a focus on expenses just became very clear where dealers were headed. And so I wanted to build a service to help dealers save money on managing their vendors. Everything from onboarding the vendor, selecting the vendor, going through the demo process, procurement, connecting invoices so that you could see if you had an overspend, managing the contracts, just all things vendor. And I really came to the conclusion that in order for that service to work, it had to be free. It had to be free for dealers to join. As you know, there's not a lot of companies that do that in auto. Most companies are pretty expensive. There's a long onboarding process. You have to go through it. And so I was like, man, for this to work, it has to be free to join, and it has to be self-service, no onboarding process. And so that's what I set out to build. Focused on that, really starting in like last year about this time, maybe about May. And then the beta was ready in September. And then that went to a number of people on DealerRefresh and prior customers, and about 25. And then that beta went all the way through December. And then I announced it, as you know, in January. And so last few months, it's grown to over 200 dealerships. We've refined the vendor population, added the ability for vendors to join, and they can now set up their page and manage demos on their side, and dealers can manage demos on their side. And it's been an incredible journey for me to build it from scratch all by myself, and to see the product development cycle today versus 10 years ago when Driven Data started. It's obviously a hell of a lot easier to build software today, and something where you can just get started, and it's pretty incredible what you can figure out now.
Hell of a lot easier than 10 years ago. It's still not easy.
Still not easy, but everything is possible. Like, I think that's the biggest difference is like, normally entrepreneurs, you get a block and then you're like, man, I need to find this person to unblock me. And that just doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just a matter of time, but you can literally solve every problem today, which is great.
What would be an example of that?
Well, like for me, I had a pretty good knowledge of back-end development and the architecture for back-end, but UI, I didn't. And so I remember some of the first screenshots I posted, Alex, you even called me out for it. You're like, whose UI is this? I'm like, mine. And he's like, no. I want to know whose that is in the screenshot. I'm like, it's mine. He's like, yeah, I get that, but whose is it? And I'm like, dude, I made this. Like, are you joking right now? And he's just like, but who'd you have build it? I'm like, no, I built it. So like after about 3 or 4, you're like, okay, that's pretty. I'm like, are you messing with me right now? You weren't. You were like in disbelief that I was able to make that. I think, yeah.
That's funny.
Yep.
So I think the UI for me was.
I was also such a fan of the driven data UI.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I was too.
I'm kidding, by the way.
I know.
I actually didn't mind it. It was cumbersome, but I liked it.
Charts and graphs, right? There's no charts and graphs level up. It is, I keep it at a cartoon level. You know, there's less pixels. The whole aesthetic design choice is the fewer the pixels, the better.
Okay.
So
That's
a lesson I learned from driven data for sure.
Yeah, less is more.
Yes,
that's what they say.
So you've got a vendor management suite now, and what and you did post up the your roadmap. So what are some of the things that dealers can manage right now, and then what are they going to be able to do? Let's say the end of this quarter, and then where do you want to be by the end of the year?
Yeah, so today, a dealership entirely on their own can add all of their locations. So it supports an entire dealer group up to as many locations as you want. Each of those dealerships you can add with all of the vendors, all of the contracts for those vendors, and it supports, there's ambiguity in contracts. So like when you think about, if you're part of a dealer group, if you're part of a dealer group, you could have, let's say 10 stores, right, in your group. You could have one contract that's for the group, a contract that's for one store, or a contract that's for 3 of those 10 stores, right? So it's the assignment and the relationship between the contracts, the stores, the invoices, and the stores are very complex. And so at the heart of this is a really elegant architecture that supports all of that insanity, because that was something that we had to think about a lot at Driven Data. And so with this, I started luckily with this really kind of grand architecture of like, okay, what's the most complicated like organization you can think of? And then let's make sure that it solves for that. And so that group support and the ability to connect everything in one common interface was really like the obvious thing to start with. And then when you think about like, okay, if I'm a dealer and I want to get a hold of all my vendors and I want to understand who I have, there's 577 that are fully mapped in a database with products and, a summary, obviously like more insight about what those companies do, what categories of products they have. And so when you add a vendor, it's as simple as at first an onboarding, literally selecting logos and saying, these are all the vendors that I have. But then later on, just as simple as, adding the product that they have, putting in the terms, putting in the contract, and now having everything in one place. They also have the ability to add notes. And so one of the things that came out, especially from a lot of the kind of first in the beta, was everybody wanted to keep track of the meetings that they had with vendors and what the vendor and them last talked about. And oftentimes there would be one person having those meetings and other people in the organization not being aware that what happened on those conversations. So having the ability for the notes to be just kind of ever present. And when you have, multiple vendors, multiple locations, it really does get challenging to keep track of what you said last. So that was a really kind of common thing that came up. One of the things that I'm most proud of in November, there was this kind of question of how we're going to tie invoices to Level Up. And invoices, tracking the expenses, in an integration versus having to manually update it, that seemed like a very important feature. And so Bill Playford gave me the idea of connecting the invoice from the incoming email to the dealership that had the attachment, and then parsing that and putting that into the database and matching it. And so we use the infrastructure for Level Up is on Google's infrastructure, and Google has a service called Document AI, and this is not Gemini. This is kind of an older service that they've had for decades now. That is, pretty ironclad at parsing invoices and contracts and a bunch of things. So it's a very specific service. So it's probably parsed millions and millions and millions of invoices. So that's what it does. And then you can then connect that to a vendor, as long as that vendor is already in the database, and very simply kind of keep this flow of all of your invoices in a history. And it doesn't upset how they're paying the invoices in the dealership. That process is separate. This is just picking them up because we're essentially BCC'd on the invoice or auto forwarded the invoice, which is great because I didn't have to do a DMS integration. Very lightweight. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the common ones. Some of the other ones that got added really in like January were the ability to connect with your 20 group. So you can now invite other members and connect with each other and see in your 20 group all the dealerships in one place. And notifications, email, alerts, those are some of the more recent things. And, just ultimately like polishing has been the last 20 days or so. Looking forward, I kind of looked at like, okay, we have the vendors now have the ability to add their profile, connect with dealers. One of the things that we launched in March was the ability for dealers to connect with vendors in a demo and have that lead route directly to the vendor. And this is all on the dealer's terms. So I kind of coin it, as like Bumble for car dealers because they make the first move. The vendor then meet the dealer at the time that the dealer's requested, and they can then have that meeting all on their own. And so that, that ability to connect is what I think is unique because dealers have a place to research vendors, to compare those vendors without having, 20 incoming calls a day, and that be the way that they set up that, demos, which I think is fundamentally broken.
So where do you plan to be in the next 2.5 months when this quarter's over?
Yeah, I think developing less is actually the primary focus right now. What I learned, I have a bad habit of just like building. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm just gonna build a ton of stuff.
Disregard Matt Watson it.
I'm just like, I'm just gonna make shit and we'll see. So I connected a service that allows me to do screen recordings. So it anonymously captures the screen and I can see what people do on Level Up. And I can even see when they rage click. It actually gives you a notice. So rage clicking is
what?
Rage click.
Rage clicking is when somebody is like violently clicking the mouse in one section of the UI where clearly something is not working as they intended, right? And so rage clicking is you get alerts for these actually, which is kind of interesting. But what I did just in studying it was I realized like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that just is not getting used. And that comes to basic kind of, tutorials, walkthroughs, explanation, documentation, kind of the boring stuff. And it's not as exciting, but that's the stuff that really matters. And then I've had a number of product people connect with me that have seen it and they said, love the UI, a bunch of feedback, and focusing on just how do you, smooth that out. So it's a kind of a boring answer, but it's the real answer. The real answer is if you have all these great features, but it's buried because people aren't finding it for whatever reason, that's a bigger issue than building another thing that's buried.
And, most vendors aren't going to tell you, we're not going to develop much for the next quarter.
Yeah.
Transparency for you.
No,
Um,
so one of the things that I started thinking about was doing an integration with Gemini, Google Gemini. That kind of took me down this path that actually led to the second part of our conversation about what we can do together. Um, a fun idea that I'm really excited about is we made the search database public. So you don't even have to create an account. You can search every vendor on our platform. Go right to our website and you can see search vendors, and it's totally free. You can just search it all. But I got this idea of sharing builds. So I think this would be a lot of fun where, you could go on, add a bunch of vendors together and share it publicly and say, this is how I would build a small, independent dealership, or this is how I would build a luxury metro dealership, and create challenges saying you have X amount of money, build the best, packaging of vendors you can to satisfy this challenge. And so sharing builds and making builds public, making them drag and drop in the UI is going to be a challenge for me to do. And I want to build a fun place where you can experiment with different vendors and combinations and then share those publicly to get feedback and create challenges off of that. So I think that's going to be a fun area. I already have a sandbox that's kind of the underlying thing that would power this. So it's just a UI component to what already exists in the architecture.
Well, that would definitely satisfy the daily repetition of, hey, what CRM should I buy? What website company should I look at next?
Yeah, and I think transition to the conversation about DealerRefresh. I keep track and level up every search term. So when I opened up the search publicly, all of a sudden the site was getting within a few days over 100 users every day, and I still people were just searching for level up, and I don't know exactly where they all came from all of a sudden, but because I made 2 posts on LinkedIn and 1 on DealerRefresh, and all of a sudden there's a ton of intent, and the searches were long, they were complex, and oftentimes the results weren't satisfying the search. At the same time, I was doing all of these screen recaps, watching people use the service and kind of not finding what they were looking for. And then I was also watching DealerRefresh, and I noticed in the last month, 40% of the threads that people start on DealerRefresh are about what vendor should I choose. That is by far the most common question.
Yeah, go on Facebook and see what.
Leave that.
Oh my gosh, the Facebook groups, it's all about what's the, which subprime financing source should I use? What CRM should I use? What's a better replacement for V Auto? All these questions are just and they've been asked a million times.
At least on DealerRefresh, not to toot our own horn, but I'm going to. The answers are much more involved and try to figure out what kind of dealer you are before just whatever it is you use at your store without any explanation whatsoever, which is what you get on Facebook a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And 2, whenever you want to go back and search, it's not as easy across social media sites to find exactly what you're looking for. If there was a past conversation, past discussion, whereas if you do the search on DealerRefresh, it's 20 years.
Yeah, and I kind of thought about it. I was there is actually no better database of kind of vendor questions and answers in the country than DealerRefresh. This is the biggest, most rich one. And I was well, if I could combine all the historical threads and posts and context of that with the vendor database and allow users to ask questions and get, recommendations as well as all the kind of prior conversations, that I think would satisfy search in an entirely new way. And so that kind of, I actually was just like, that's what I want to do. I don't know how that can happen, but that's what I want, because that's actually what was happening in Dealer. You can go on there now and you can look at the most recent kind of, I think like right now there's one about a CRM. If you go in there and look, you're going to see, like these topics have all come up. That exact kind of question, Q&A back and forth, that's come up at least 7-8 times. Just that one. And so obviously I'm not trying to say like, hey, people don't post. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is what an asset that is if that could be enabled for people to make decisions.
Yeah, it's best CRM for dealers in 2024. Someone started that a week or so ago. Yeah, and
Also the buying
for me sometimes but what you said for me is I wouldn't say it's frustrating. It used to. I don't let it bother me much anymore because I'm like, just use the search feature. But like you said, it really makes sense. Start a new thread. It becomes, obviously we're going after content.
Well,
and then there's also,
sucks.
I think someone just started another one too, Buying Center CRM.
Yep. Which is a totally valid point, right? Like, hey, I need a specialization of.
I just want to make a point to fill this in a little more color here. Like DealerRefresh, our search sucks. It's you got to nail it. Like the actual you got the term has to match directly. Like you can't if you go and search QR code. This one drives me nuts. We have this thread that's I think 11 years old, and it's rich with QR ideas, but the title of the thread does not say QR code at all. So it won't pop up in the search. But then you go over to Google and you type in something that's general, you're going to get a page, probably 2 or 3 pages of results of gamified websites that are just SEO built crap that don't answer a thing. They're all this generic junk that's definitions of exactly what you search for when you're trying to get to an answer. So there's the problem. How do we solve this?
So like to kind of put a bow on it, like if you go on Google and search for like a good CRM for an independent dealership or a small dealership, dealership CRM, it's ads. It's like, you're going to see, ads for Pipedrive, Salesforce, HubSpot. No one's using those in auto. You're going to see content from all those companies, the review sites that those companies pay. And like maybe on page 3, you'll see some DealerRefresh stuff. None of the vendors are going to show up, And so as a dealer, there's just really a horrible process of finding vendors and answering questions, right? So, okay, problem's pretty obvious. There's this, gold mine of like prior threads and context. And then there's, a pristine vendor database. And so how do you combine these two? So that's what I went out and trying to figure out. And turns out like this is actually pretty solvable. And it's called semantic search. And so semantic search looks at context, not at keywords. And if you take a step back and you think about like AI tools today, there's really been this emergence of like AI assistants and chatbots. And, people have, especially in like auto, I think our exposure to this is about, all right, there's Chat GPT for like, I have questions. I want it to kind of automate things for me or take some workload off me. Or I want to maybe use that for like, live chat on my website. But the issue with that, and I think the area that we've seen come up short, is it's not specialized enough to your dealership. It's not specialized to the task. So it may have like broad knowledge, but it doesn't have specialized knowledge. And so when you think about contextual search or semantic search, it's how do you create that local info. So that's actually what dealer refresh and all of the prior threads and posts that represents the context. And so I looked. There's like I think there's about 7,000 threads, and every thread on average has 1.6 pages. So it can be there's pagination, right? So one page in a thread is 10 posts. So whatever the average thread has like 16 posts.
This was in the past 5 years, right?
Yeah, in the past 5 years. And so what I did is I downloaded all of that. So I literally downloaded everything on Dealer Refresh. I'm like shocked this didn't show up on Google. Um, but I did. I have my
It'll
hard
probably
drive.
show up on our AWS bill.
Yeah, sorry.
Cloudflare.
Yeah. Hey, let it happen. So that's the other weird thing. Apparently, you can just do that. So, like every page, I turned into an HTML file, and then I converted that to a text file. So I have a text file of every thread and post for the last 5 years. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to turn this into, I'm going to convert it into a vector database. So I'm not going to go into all this, because it is pretty nerdy. But if you think about a vector, you think of like a grid, like X and Y coordinates on a grid. It's about dimensions. It's about context. And so at the simplest level, when you have like an X and Y, coordinates on a grid, and you're looking at two dimensions, say like age and gender, like a boy that's young, right? A boy that's old would be like a grandfather. A girl that's old would be a grandmother. A girl that's middle aged, just whatever. You can kind of look at that on a grid. Each one of those dots on this grid would have dots closer to that. They're called neighbors, and that way, when you're kind of in a keyword search, when you're just searching for girl, there's a lot other things when you think about that keyword that it could mean. Woman, grandmother, aunt, right? Those are all different variants of that word that all in context mean something. And this is where keyword search really fails because it's just optimized for that exact word. It's missing the multiple dimensions that make up English language. And so what large language models and what vector databases have done is allow to have that deeper context. So instead of 2 dimensions, it actually goes to, I think it's like 1,536 dimensions, which obviously you can't even like think about. But it's just that complex and how all these words relate to each other. So by mapping all of Dealer Refresh and then mapping the vendor database together, what that'll enable users to do is search and ask it questions, and then it provides the closest responses contextually to your question. So if you're saying, hey, what's the best CRM for a small dealership? It's going to look at all the CRMs. It's going to look at all the mentions of those CRMs by name in Dealer Refresh, where things like small, independent, etc. have come up. And then it's going to look at a score on a scale of 0 to 1 and produce the highest results in a list. So now you can say, okay, here are these threads where that conversation has come up. Here's who those vendors are. And now I have this deeper understanding of, what's out there. That's just one example. And I'm probably about a third of the way done with building it. But I think it'll be for me, it's fun to build this, obviously. And I think it's a cool experiment to see if I can do it. But ultimately, I want it to be an entirely new way to think about, searching for a vendor and finding a partner that really fits all the dimensions for your dealership. It's not how does a vendor keyword rank their way into your store? How do they, call their way into their store? It's how do they contextually fit your store? And I think that's where semantic search really is incredible. And obviously kind of keyword search really falls short.
Interesting. So I wonder, like we were joking about how often Uncle Joe posts because he likes to, put 14 posts in a row. Like he is so focused on inventory merchandising.
Yeah.
So if this is successful in what you're trying to put together, would somebody who posts a lot, I wonder how much weight that would put in the results. See.
So I did tag the users. I was debating whether I should do that. So luckily you have it really well structured in the HTML. It's just, I think it's like an author tag or something. And I even captured when people are quoted and then the response within that quote. So we'll see how this ends up, once it's vectorized. I don't know what it's going to look like. I can't really think that far ahead, but I think the author matters. I think, it's kind of like, you've seen these like Twitter graphs, I'm sure, where like certain people on Twitter like have this like lion's share of, the influence across the network. And I think that's definitely the case in DealerRefresh or any forum.
80-20 rule.
Well, yeah, because we just had like Dr. from Kazakhstan posted about 40 times this morning.
Yeah. Was it something about love pills
back.
or something?
Yeah.
That was yesterday, wasn't it? Yesterday.
No, that was this morning. I got that one. There were like 4 yesterday.
Sometimes I'll wake up and I'll see. I'm like, man, this is hilarious.
It's always 3. It's 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
That's when they hit. It's always 3, 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
in the morning.
I'm getting done working on some thing, and then I look at this. I'm like, man, what is going on?
I'll look at all the news. Exhausted all the ways we can block these spammers.
Oh my god!
But
everything.
And joking aside on that one, when you were talking about how you captured the quotes, this takes me back. Jeff and I were in a meeting yesterday with Dealer Authority, and we were looking at LinkedIn performance. So one of the engagement scores that LinkedIn does is they look at likes and clicks and all this kind of stuff.
Shares.
They combine all the engagement capabilities and then score it. And we have some quotes. That's a big one. Like if somebody's quoting your post, that's a huge indicator that there's something very relevant there. And then 2, we also have our ratings at the bottom, so you can thumb up something, you can give it the poo, that kind of thing. And I wonder if that's catchable as well.
I didn't get it. I definitely saw it, and one of the issues is because it's rich HTML, like the parsing process is kind of intense, to be honest. And so, like my Python is not exactly up to snuff. So I was definitely in the weeds trying to get it purified because, there's people put some crazy stuff that breaks it. You know what I mean? There'll be the GIFs and, images and video, every different kind of thing that you can imagine goes in there. And so stripping it all out. The author also has kind of like their authority too, like how many posts they've made. So that's another kind of potential way in the future. But yeah, I think there's a ton of, and it's really, now that I've built it, it's super easy for me to redo it. I can, in an hour, probably redo everything with the push of a button. So my theory is I'm going to do it, train it, and on the initial 5 years, and then periodically do an upsert of the last recent change data, and then remap it. But I think for 5 years, it's going to be an incredible place to start asking questions, and then when you compare that to, especially like I was thinking about vendors, right? One of the challenges that I have is trying to figure out what categories their products fit. Like there's just, that is as ambiguous of a question as you could possibly imagine. Like it's so complicated. And you want to talk about, gamification, right? They're saying all these things of what they do without explaining how they do it. Like it, almost like selling the product on outcomes versus explaining what it actually does. That's a real common trend. And so I think looking at products through this lens is another really interesting way of categorizing them, as opposed to saying like this is a CRM or this is a website or this is a, like, explain what service IQ is. Like, what is that? It doesn't fit a cute product category, right? It does all of these things. There's like capabilities that it has, and those capabilities contextually matter more than some preordained classification from 10 years ago. So people have a problem, they want to solve it, and then they are forced into a 10-year-old category that defines what a product does versus, hey, I just want to search for something that solves this problem. And I think that fundamentally can change the way dealers connect with vendors.
Interesting.
This also sounds like just the future of search in general.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. Like, this is nothing that, hundreds and hundreds of companies aren't thinking about and doing right now. Like, vector databases are like some of the most well-funded, fastest growing companies in the world right now.
Really?
Yeah.
So take a step back. You're taking the DealerRefresh data. All right. So it's a database that's being built. And how much is, because you had mentioned something about Gemini earlier, and we had talked about GPT before as well. How much is an AI language tool going to come into play for these?
So that's what actually does the vectoring. So there's a database that sits kind of in the middle, and then there's OpenAI that sits on top of it, and then OpenAI processes every single chunk, which is just a block of text, and it converts that into X and Y coordinates, basically. So 1,536 coordinates for each chunk that you give it, and then that goes into the database as an ID. And so you determine how big that individual chunk of data is, and then it then converts that does the vectoring. But that's what ChatGPT does. That's what OpenAI does. They produce the vector. Then when the user does a search, it converts that search to a vector as well. And then those two vectors get overlaid next to each other, and that's how it looks for similarity. And there's more depth to this, right? You may want to use multiple models. And so there's services like LangChain that will allow you to look at multiple models concurrently and look at different methods of scoring, and it can get really complex. I am going to make this as simple as I can get it to work. and from there, then I'll kind of figure out, okay, how do you make it better?
So the end goal here, if I'm reading all this right, for DealerRefresh and Level Up, is Level Up would have DealerRefresh content inside of the app. So when somebody searches for, say, dealer.com, they would then see all the dealer.com threads or any mentions of it and that kind of thing.
Right. That's like a pretty simple, right? It could also be, they're searching for something about like digital marketing or website or a specific challenge that they have that dealer.com ends up being, contextually part of. So keyword searches, like, we can do that right now. You can do that right now. But yes, that would be for sure inside of Level Up. You would see the threads on DealerRefresh and then be able to go to DealerRefresh and view those threads for sure.
So on DealerRefresh, it would be, there's this hole out there. So Driven Data did a great thing for the industry. They came out with vendor reviews. And
Driven Data.
They
Driving
got
sale.
Oh, sorry, it's driving sales. Yeah, sorry, my bad. So driving sales came out with vendor reviews, and at first they were great. Then of course they got gamed, as all reviews typically do. But if there was a way for Level Up to create a pure vendor review with content.
Like sentiment analysis, basically.
Yeah, that we could somehow have a place on DealerRefresh. I think that would be
Yeah.
great to
Yeah, I
revive.
think sentiment analysis is pretty easy, I think, for a service like this, because when you think about like sentiment, it's a feeling somebody has expressed about a product, right? That feeling could be anger, it could be joy, it could be some degree of like frustration, or man, they really but it's like it's like a review, right? When you read a review and you see a star rating, the star is kind of like irrelevant, right? The context of what they said is what matters.
Right.
So I think a lot of times with reviews, we get hung up on like the scoreboard, but we miss the context. And so
Yeah,
sentiment
I never pay
analysis,
attention to the stars.
right?
Well,
And you
I
always kind of
do.
think about like who's
If
the
they're too
person that
low,
writes.
I walk away.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if they're really low, but if they're between 3 and 5, I'm still clicking in. I'm going to read why are people bitching about this product, or what makes this product so great.
Well, you got so one of the things that we'll have to be careful of, and this obviously we don't need to solve this on day one. This is just something that's probably going to happen out of the gate if we get all this figured out the way we're visualizing it. Um,
yeah,
but down the road for sure. But like I, Jeff too, like we read almost everything that hits DealerRefresh. So if you were to say take websites for example, like the shiningest star website because Joe Chura spent so much time on DealerRefresh helping to build his brand at Dealer Inspire when they were first getting started, you find very little negative stuff about Dealer Inspire and DealerRefresh. On the other hand, dealer.com, I can't think of a positive thread about them there.
right,
So
because they've avoided it.
yeah, they have avoided it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think yeah, it's almost like their voice is missed in the equation. And so is that reflective of the service, or is it like oversampled to good because there's been like a brand focus because they're on the. Yeah, I think it would definitely tip the scales towards one company versus another. But I think your reputation is a conversation. It's not, if it's a one-way conversation, it's kind of like shame on you, right? Um, and so I think brands have a responsibility to engage and be a part of that conversation. So if I'm a vendor and I know this is a thing, yeah, get involved. Like make sure your brand is represented the right way. And I think it's also important where accidents and mistakes happen, whatever, but there's going to be a better way for you to absorb that than if there's just like one conversation and you're ignoring it. But I
Or
think the
that's the
sentiment
only time you
analysis,
get
I think,
involved, like
show that.
dealer.com. They only get involved when there's a fire.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like it'll be really interesting to see like what the sentiment looks like, because I think that's actually a pretty easy question to answer once it's in there. Um, and how vendors engage from that. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, G2 for automotive vendors. Like G2 is a huge inspiration for Level Up. Um, I think they're really the best example out there of how to do this. A lot of that is still very keyword driven and it's very incentive driven. So G2 pays, as does most review sites, for reviews, and vendors of G2 end up paying for those reviews as a byproduct of it through their service. And it's very expensive. If you're a vendor and you're in like Trust Radius or G2, it's many tens of thousands of dollars to be on there. But yeah, they've definitely for the last 20 years, like they own that space for sure.
Hmm.
What was the rest of Ryan's statement though? I saw like G2 for automotive dealers.
I'll put it back up. So he says anonymous reviews, but all reviewers are verified as real dealers before
Yeah.
they can get access to leave reviews.
Yeah, so right now they're already verified and Level Up. So we take reviews right now. They're verified because you added the dealership, you added yourself as a dealership, your email is the same domain of that dealership. when you add a dealership to Level Up, you can't just type in the dealership. You have to search for the dealership. The Google API results are what you select for when you add your dealership. So it has to be a real dealership. And then your domain has to match the domain for the review to track. So for it to count. So by the design of it, it's much. I mean, obviously, I think if somebody wanted to, they could add reviews, but I would see it. But one of the issues, obviously, of like certified reviews or verified reviews, I didn't want to have that be a challenge right away, given kind of the history of that.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, in terms of like how this looks on DealerRefresh or how this looks on Level Up. I mean, Alex, I think you're the design perspective more than me, clearly, right? Given what
you're
saying.
moving up in the world, John.
I know, man. I'm taking a page out of your book, but like ultimately, I think like how that looks and the aesthetic of it, and what is on Level Up and what's on DealerRefresh. I think once there's cool shit, then you can kind of figure out what to do.
I mean, both Level Up and DealerRefresh require somebody to be signed in. So we know who you are. So it isn't like, I mean, sure, let's say somebody from vendor XYZ signs up and acts like a dealer. How many of those accounts are there really going to be? And it gets real obvious if like 50
it gets real obvious
on the same day.
You guys don't even police it anymore. Like the overall, there's like 10, 20 people on DealerRefresh that just snuff that out instantly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We can, yeah.
Oh yeah. Anything. Spam. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're so quick.
Yeah.
Which is
so
great.
I think that part's covered.
Yeah.
The interesting thing here and where my head's going is like this vector database based on content. Like what we could almost do is just start a thread per vendor in the Zenfora space. We give it a different look and feel so it doesn't feel like the forum. And then make it so people are really just leaving reviews. And then the system you're building right now, just based on that, content alone, could just suck it up.
Yeah. So, and in terms of like identifying a match to a vendor, there's a lot of different things, right? There's the domain, the URL of the website. There's the name of the vendor. There's also, I track acquisitions. So I have the parent-child relationships of the sub-companies, right? So if one company owns another company, I capture that in a tree so I can see like, okay, and it gets kind of, I probably am not always 100% caught up, but as they happen, I try to update it. And then I regularly, the way that Level Up gets its vendor information is through, it's called firmographic data. So I basically put out, like a company name or a URL, and it gives me through an API, a lot of information about these companies. And then it gets curated. So it's not like completely automated, but at this point, the lift is pretty easy.
I think we're on to something, guys.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I'm glad you brought this to my attention, John. This is
I know I'm trying to explain it is a little challenging, I think, but if you think about it, like regular search sucks. Search has to get smarter. How do you make search smart? Context. What better way to provide context than 20 years of crazy posts about vendors? Like, there's also some weird stuff that's going to show up that I think is just funny, right? Like,
oh yeah.
And the entertainment factor
wait till you
doing
suck in the blog
by itself. Yeah.
Or the blog comments from the TypePad days. Those were some fun comments.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Especially to get into Auto Trader.
But I do think I think it's exciting because this kind of capability, dealerships could do this. Like you could have your AI assistant be really tuned on your inventory and all the information about your inventory, so you could ask it contextual questions. Like this is called embedding. Vector embedding is what this is called. For like OpenAI has a service called embedding. And it's also very affordable, which is another really kind of cool feature of this because it doesn't use a bunch of compute. And so I think it would be really exciting to see vendors start doing this, because right now they're mostly doing the API, Chat GPT API. They're not doing embeddings yet. It's less popular, but I think it's actually like way more powerful. And I think no one's really kind of given it the time of day that I think it deserves yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jon, we're hitting the 2 p.m. or past it actually.
Yeah, I was hoping to get a short live demo.
Well, it's free, so you just sign up and get in there. Yeah.
True.
I don't.
How do you get there?
What's
the URL? Because if you do a search for LVL Up, dude, you get results for pizza.
I think
places.
I own it now. I think I do. I have it pretty well. LVL UP Auto.com is the site. Yeah. And there's a couple dealerships that were called Level Up Auto, and I've displaced them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
I did a search for just Level Up, and it was like a paintball company, fitness company, pizza.
Well, see, that's just because of your search history. You're a paintball guy.
No. There were a ton. My favorite, honestly, though, I like the graphics that you use, the theme. I know it's cheesy, but it takes me back.
Yeah, man. Nostalgia.
All right, so it's lvlupauto.com.
Yep.
And anyone can
It's in the
up.
comments for YouTube and Facebook.
Yep. Yeah, I'll make sure it gets linked to over in the form.
Yeah, if somebody wants a demo, I'm happy to go over it. But it's
John's
rare
got
that
ads on DealerRefresh as well. You can always click one of those and get there too.
Yeah.
Yes.
True. So more to come, I think.
Yeah, man, this is cool.
I
got a good start, so I'll keep working on it, and I'm excited. I think it'll be, I'm curious what it's going to spit out when you're asking questions. That's the day I'm looking forward to, is when I can have it live. So we'll see. Probably, I'm probably about a week and a half away from it being in a POC. So yeah, it's not the big lift. I think is getting DealerRefresh organized, which I already did. So
man, you did it that fast. You got us organized.
20 years of a mess.
Cool.
All right, guys.
Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome back, Jon.
Yes, Jon. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.